Hi, I'm Chef Richard Miller. Welcome to Chef Richard's Kitchen. On this episode, we're going to make a cheesecake. And cheesecake was something that I usually didn't have very good luck with. It usually came out either underdone and gooey or burnt to a crisp. And I actually resorted to going out and buying a cheesecake when I had some guests over, if you can imagine that. And yes, I did tell them that it was store-bought. I didn't try and pawn it off as my own. Anyway, the traditional thought for making cheesecake was you turn the oven up to 500 degrees, put the cheesecake in there, let it go for about 5-10 minutes, something like that, until it browns the top nicely, and then turn it down to 200 degrees and let it go for a couple hours, and that'll cook the cheesecake. Well, the problem with that is that all ovens dissipate heat at a different rate, and so a well-insulated oven would probably, your cheesecake would be overdone. An oven that holds no heat would probably be a little gooey. And it was bothering a lot of people, and I finally read an article by Andrea Gary of Cooks Illustrated, and what she said made a lot of sense. And what she said was, let's start it out at 200 degrees, let's go ahead and bake it until it's cooked, and then let's go ahead and brown the top. Well, seemed to make sense to me, and I've never gotten bad advice out of Cooks Illustrated, so I thought, let's give it a try. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to use that method. I've used it a couple of times before. The results come out perfect every time. This method it's good, it's repeatable, and it's easily taught. So that's what I'm going to do here for you today. We're going to make it in 3 steps. Number 1, we're going to make a crust. We make a crust, a graham cracker crust, put it in a springform pan. And for everybody that doesn't know what a springform pan, it's a pan that when you release it, it comes off the bottom. So what we're going to do is we're going to take and we're going to put our crust in here. We're going to bake it for a few minutes at 325 degrees. Then once this is done, the crust is baked, then we're going to make our filling, put it in, and then we're going to bake it. Step number 2, of course, is the filling. Step number 3 is we're going to make a blueberry topping for it. And you can make a cherry topping, you can make a lemon, any kind of a fruit topping will be good on there. This time I just happen to have a bag of frozen blueberries, so that's what we're going to use. So anyway, let's get started with the first step, and that's making the crust. So I'm going to break up 6 graham crackers. I'm going to break them into pieces and put them in the food processor. All right. I'm going to take 1/3 of a cup of dark brown sugar, well packed, and 1/2 cup of flour. All right. Put in just a little bit of salt. And let's go ahead and pulse it. Alright, now when we've got our crust mixed nicely, or our dry materials mixed nicely, I'm going to pour in about 7 tablespoons of butter. And I'm going to do this in a couple of different additions. Okay, there's the first. There's our second. All right. So now that our crust is made, what we want to do is we want to take and we want to butter our springform pan. And you can spray butter in there, or you can do what I do a lot of times, and that's just spray a non-stick coating in there. So I'm just going to spray a non-stick coating. Like such. And now it's time to make our crust. Now to make our crust, we want to take one of our little circular dishes here. You can take a water glass if you want. As long as the edges are fairly straight and smooth and the bottom smooth, it works fine. So, all right, now, let's go ahead and let's get it fairly even just with our fingers here. And now we want to take our glass and we want to take and push this up against the sides, probably about an inch or so up. All right. Now, I don't know if you can see that or not. I'm going to go over to my other camera, and I'm hoping this shows it a little better. But this is pressed down nicely. There's an edge up around. It goes part way up the springform pan, and we're ready to bake it now. So I'm going to put it in the oven for a few minutes, and you want to bake it probably about 10 minutes or so until it's fragrant, and maybe you can see the outline of getting a little brown in there. So let me go ahead and put it on a pan. Put it in the oven, and we'll see you in about 10 minutes. Don't go away. Next step we're going to do is we're going to do our filling. And to do the filling, you have to take and unwrap 5 blocks of 8-ounce cream cheese. And the cream cheese, when you do this, has to be softened. It needs to be at room temperature. So let it sit out. If you've had it in the refrigerator, let it sit out, a couple hours beforehand. Also, sometimes getting these out of those foil wrappers isn't exactly easy, so that's the reason I cut the camera, so I wouldn't make a fool of myself on video while I tried to get those out. So, what we're going to use for the filling is we're going to use 5 8-ounce packages of cream cheese, 2 egg yolks. We've separated the whites and just kept the yolks. 6 whole eggs, a cup and a half of sugar, a third of a cup of cream cheese, a little bit of salt, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and 2 teaspoons of lemon juice. So, let's go ahead and let's get started. Here's our cream cheese. And for this, we're going to use our paddle. And we'll just get it started a little bit here. Alright, I'm going to put in my egg yolks now. And about half of my sugar. That's mixing in very, very well. I'm going to put in just a pinch of salt. And now I'm going to put in the 6 eggs. I'm going to put them in probably 2 at a time. You don't want to throw all of them in at once. On my recipe I put 1 at a time, but I think I've done it with 2 at a time, you're fine. There's 2. Four. 6. Okay, now it's time, let's go ahead and scrape it down. Alright, and we'll add, at this point, we'll add our sour cream. The rest of our sugar. And we'll mix a little more. Now, as soon as this is mixed in, again, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add the vanilla extract and the lemon. Alright, now let's go ahead and add 2 teaspoons of each. There's 2 teaspoons of lemon juice. Two teaspoons of the vanilla extract. Now let's mix it in again well. Okay, we're blended in very nicely. So let's go ahead and take the filling out. Now here's a trick I've learned. You're probably going to be fine with this, but you want your filling to be as rich and as smooth as you can get it. So one of the things that I do is I like to run it through a strainer. Now, this is pretty thick. You know it's not going to go through the strainer. So what we're going to do is we're going to pour a little bit in, and we're going to take our spatula, and you see now while I kind of push it and stir it, you see how that's going through. Take your time, don't rush it. Can you skip this step? Sure, but you'll never know. You'll probably end up with some lumps in your filling that, you know, is going to kind of embarrass you if somebody ends up getting it. You can see there's a couple of them. Whoops. You can see there's a couple of them. As you can see, there's a few little lumps in there now. We just prevented those from getting in our cheesecake. As you can see, it takes a little bit, not much, but it does take a little bit of working this down to get it through the sieve. That's okay. Take your time. It'll definitely be worth it when we're done. Now the last batch, All right, now as we got to the bottom of our bowl, we found some more clumps in there. And by using this method and straining it, we're not going to end up with clumps in there. And you don't want to embarrass yourself in front of your guests. So please take this extra step and do it. All right, now we have our filling strained. Let's go ahead and let's put it in our shell. Okay, let's take our crust here. And let's pour in our filling. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll smooth this out just a bit. There. Now here's another lesson I've learned. Let's go ahead and I want to let this sit for about 10 minutes. And what that's going to do is any air bubbles that are in there are going to rise to the top and we can go ahead and poke them there. Once this is done, then it's time to go to the oven. So I'll be back in about 10 minutes and it'll be ready to put it in the oven. Don't go away. Alright, it's been about 15 minutes and as the bubbles have risen to the surface, I've taken a toothpick and I've gone ahead and I popped them. And every once in a while you have a little crater in there that probably, isn't real beautiful. So what I do is I just take and run the toothpick around it a couple of times and that fixes it. Okay, now that it's nice and smooth, let's go ahead and put it on our rack. And now let's go ahead and let's put it in the oven. Now I put the oven at 200 degrees. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that in there for about 20, 25, maybe 30 minutes. And during that time, any other bubbles that are left down in there are going to rise to the surface. So we're going to bring it out after about 20, 25 minutes, something like that. See if there's any additional bubbles. If there are, go ahead and burst them. Then we're going to put it back in there for about 2.5 hours. Now, if anybody remembers when I did my creme brulee episode, where you get the filling to the point where it's just going to solidify but not harden, what was the temperature on that? Well, it was 165 degrees. So what we're going to do is we're just going to make sure that when we pull this out after about 3 hours, which is going to take probably a half hour to the bubbles, then another 2.5 hours, then we're going to put the thermometer in there and we're going to check it. We're going to check to see when it gets to 165 degrees. Don't rely on time. All right? Ovens, that may be 220, it may be 230, something like that. The thermometers in there and the thermostats aren't that good. Use your own temperature gauge here. Use your own thermometer. So we're going to go by we're going to go by temperature, not by time. So, once again, I'll see you in about a half an hour. Don't go far. Okay, it's been 30 minutes, so let's go ahead and let's pull the cheesecake out of the oven and let's see if there are any bubbles that have risen to the surface that we need to take care of. Well, as you can see, there are a few. So let's go ahead and let's take that toothpick and let's go ahead and pop those. Okay, now that we have those popped, let's go ahead and let's put the cheesecake back in the oven, and we're going to bake it for 2.5 hours at 200, and then we're going to go ahead and use the thermometer and we're going to check the temperature. Now, obviously, I'm not going to make you wait 2.5 hours before I take his temperature. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the camera off now. And as I always tell you, don't go far. Come back, or you might miss something. Okay, while we wait for the cheesecake to bake, let's go ahead and make our topping. I mentioned we were going to make a blueberry topping. And you can either use fresh or frozen blueberries. It doesn't make any difference. You can use cherries, you can use lemon, you can use about any kind of fruit you want. I used blueberries just simply because I had a bag of frozen blueberries down in the freezer. So I decided to use those. So what we're going to do is we're going to have about 10 ounces of frozen blueberries, 3/4 of a cup of sugar, 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, and here for a thickener, we have 2 teaspoons of cornstarch and 2 tablespoons of water. So let's go over to the stove now and let's go ahead and make our sauce. All right, let's go ahead and turn our stove on, and let's put our blueberries in a saucepan. Now we're going to wait for this to heat up, and while we do that, we might as well put our lemon juice in. So let's go ahead and let's now stir these blueberries until they thaw, which they're doing quite readily now. And let's put in our sugar. Alright, the sugar is kind of thick right now, but that's okay, because when the blueberries heat, they're actually going to start to burst, and they're going to release a lot of liquid. As you can tell, or as they are now. As you can see, they're releasing quite a bit of liquid. It's starting to boil lightly now. So let's go ahead and stir our cornstarch. And remember, when you make a slurry of cornstarch, the cornstarch separates very, very easily. So before you pour it in, you want to make sure you re-stir it again. And I'm pouring about half in. And we're going to let it boil again to see how much it thickens it. Actually, I used half of it, and it looks like it's thickening up very, very well right now. So let's go ahead and turn off the heat. And this will thicken just a little bit more as it cools down. Now it's thickened quite well, so let's go ahead and transfer it from the saucepan into a bowl where we can let it cool or refrigerate it or both. All right, and here's our topping, and I'll go ahead and take a picture of that. And that's all there is to it. Just some frozen blueberries, some sugar, some cornstarch, water, and a little bit of lemon juice. That's it. Now, we'll go ahead, and we've got about 2 hours left on our cheesecake. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn the camera off here again, and we're going to wait a couple hours. So 3 hours now, and I just took the temperature, and it's up to 165 degrees. So that's the critical part. Time doesn't mean a whole lot, but temperature does. Make sure it's up to 165, not too much over that, and you're ready to go. So let's go ahead and let's pull it out now. Okay, here we have our cheesecake. It's up to 165 degrees inside. Now let's go ahead and let's raise the oven temperature to 500 degrees. Okay, I just raised the temperature up to 500 degrees, and it's just gotten to there. So let's go ahead and let's put our cheesecake back in there again. And all we want to do is we want to brown the top a little, pretty much to be uniform. And that'll only take about 3 to 4 minutes. So I just put the cheesecake back in, and I set the timer for about 4 minutes. We'll look at it. It should be brown by then, and if it's nice and brown the way we want it, then we'll go ahead and we're going to pull it out, and we'll just let it cool. And from that point, our cheesecake is done. All right, last night, when this came out of the oven, I let it cool down for a couple of hours, and then wrapped it tightly, and I put it in the refrigerator, which you need to do because it needs to sit in the refrigerator probably at least 4 hours, to finally do its last setting. Bring it out at least a half hour before serving and kind of let it come up to, room temperature again. Now it's time, and I ran a knife around this about 5 minutes after it came out of the oven. That keeps it from sticking to the side of the pan. Now it's time we can go ahead and remove the pan, which we simply do by opening the pan like this and pulling it off. Here we have our cheesecake. If we look at it, we notice the crust is up to a very good height up here, about halfway up. You notice the cheesecake, there isn't any big gaping holes in it. It has a very nice color. It has a very nice set to it. I think we've got a winner. Now when you go to cut this, there's a trick there too. And what you do is make sure that you have a knife long enough to go from the center of the cheesecake out and still have a little bit left. And when you cut it, make sure that you run hot water over the knife first before each cut, and then cut it. That will allow a very clean slice down there, and it'll look extremely well when you serve it. When you plate it, put a piece of the cheesecake. Notice our blackberry sauce that we also made has thickened up quite nicely. Let it warm up a little bit as well. Just go ahead, put the blackberry sauce on top of it. If you want to garnish it, here's a good chance, a good choice would be, say, a mint sprig or something like that. Parsley, you don't really associate with cheesecake. Use edible flowers would be very good. If you want a little bit see edible flowers, go look at my margarita recipes or my videos on that. We used edible flowers on that. So edible flowers or a sprig of mint goes very well with that. You'll be surprised what your guests have to say about it, and it is delicious. Okay, well, that wraps it up for this episode. Once again, thank you for joining me. Thank you for letting me come into your kitchen. Take care. God bless. Remember, cooking always should be fun. And we'll see you next episode.